They forgot, the people who were supposed to be clapping the loudest when I crossed that stage didn't even show up. Not because they were stuck in traffic or caught in a storm. No, they just forgot, but when the spotlight hit the podium and the dean cleared his throat, it wasn't their names echoing in the auditorium. The IT was mine. And my name is Camille Rhodes. I'm 23 years old, a first-generation college graduate, and someone you'd probably walk past without a second glance. But this is the story of how I turned a forgotten graduation into the loudest triumph of my life, and maybe, just maybe, it'll make you rethink what it means to be seen. Growing up, I was the quiet kid in the back of the room, the one teachers described as independent and irresponsible. Code 4, she handles her own problems. I had to. My parents were always too busy arguing about bills or making ends meet to notice much else. They weren't bad people, just distracted ones. I learned early on that I had to be my own cheerleader, my own safety net, my own reminder that I mattered, but nothing could prepare me for how that would feel on graduation day. The months leading up to that day were a blur of research papers, part-time shifts at the campus library, and long nights studying in borrowed corners of the university cafe. I was double majoring in sociology and education. Not exactly glamorous to anyone but me. You see, for 4 years I had one goal: graduate with distinction. I wanted to prove, not just to my family, but to myself, that I was worth more than being forgotten. But deep down, I hoped that when the big day came, my parents would remember, that they'd show up and see who I'd become. I sent them reminders, texts, calendar invites, even a group chat photo of my cap and gown with 1 week left, written in bold. They liked the photo. My mom even commented a thumbs up emoji. I convinced myself that was a good sign, that they were excited in their own way, that they'd be there. So when the big day came, I woke up before sunrise. I did my own makeup, pressed my gown, and pinned my cords. I even put on a pair of pearl earrings my grandma had given me years ago, the only thing that made me feel like someone would be proud of me. But when I walked out into the stadium, scanning every row of the crowd, their seats were empty. At first, I told myself they were late. Maybe traffic. Maybe parking. But as the ceremony wore on, I stopped pretending they hadn't come. They forgot. My heart thudded in my chest like a drum. My hands felt cold, even in the warm May air. Everyone else was waving to parents, friends, uncles with giant cameras. I just stared at my hands, silently repeating, "You still did this. You still earned this." But I couldn't lie, it hurt. It burned in a way I wasn't ready for. I watched as friends next to me laughed, posed for pictures, held up signs made by their younger siblings. I tried to smile for selfies, but my throat felt tight. I texted my mom. No response. Then the dean walked up to the microphone and cleared his throat. "And now," he said, "we'd like to recognize one outstanding student whose quiet leadership, academic excellence, and service to the community have made a lasting impact on this university." I didn't even register what was happening, not until he said my name, Camille Rhodes. The whole stadium clapped. I froze. Me. I heard my name echoing from the speakers, saw students turning to look. My friend Taylor nudged me so hard I almost dropped my diploma cover. "Go," she whispered. "That's you." And somehow, my legs moved. I walked up to that stage like I was in a dream. The dean smiled as he handed me a plaque and a certificate. "You've changed more lives here than you know," he said, and for the first time that day, I felt seen. Not by my parents, but by the people who'd actually noticed. That moment didn't erase the ache. I still felt the empty space where their faces should have been in the crowd. But it did something else. It reminded me that family doesn't always mean who raised you. Sometimes, it's the people who recognize your worth even when you're silent, and sometimes, your loudest applause comes from strangers. After the ceremony, Taylor's family swept me into a group photo. Her mom gave me a tight hug and whispered, "We're proud of you, Camille." I nearly cried right there. Later that evening, my mom finally texted back, "Oh shoot, was that today?" That single sentence gutted me in a way no missed moment ever had. But instead of replying, I turned my phone off, because I was done shrinking for people who didn't show up. That night, I went back to my tiny apartment and sat on the floor in my gown, holding my award. I replayed the dean's words in my head like a mantra. "You've changed more lives here than you know." And that's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to let that moment be the peak. I was going to keep making an impact. Not to prove my parents wrong, but to prove myself right. I applied to graduate school the very next morning. A year later, I was accepted into one of the top social policy programs in the country. I moved states, rented a studio with zero furniture, and began again. This time, I built a life where I didn't wait for someone to clap. I created work that clapped for itself. That I became a mentor to undergrads who didn't have support at home. I spoke at panels about first-gen students and mental health. I launched a podcast called The Unseen Degree, sharing stories like mine from students across the country, and yes, my parents still missed most of it, but I no longer missed them. Why? The time I finished my master's, I had a job offer waiting from a nonprofit that advocates for low-income high school students. On my first day, I walked past the boardroom and caught my reflection in the glass, same pearl earrings, same quiet stare. But this time, there was no doubt in my mind I belonged here, and I wasn't alone anymore. Sometimes my mom texts me when she sees something about me online, nice picture. Your hair looks longer. Once, she asked if I was still doing that degree thing. I answer politely, but I don't wait for her applause, because the loudest recognition I ever received came when she wasn't even in the room. Now, I speak at graduations. The first time I was invited to deliver a keynote speech, I stood at the podium, looked out over hundreds of students in caps and gowns, and said to anyone sitting here whose family didn't show up, know this. You still crossed the stage. You still earned every step. And your name, your voice, your presence? It matters. So say it louder. Take up space. Let the world see you, even when the people you love don't. And when I stepped off that stage, a girl with tear-filled eyes ran up to me. My mom forgot too. She said I hugged her and told her the truth. We didn't need them to remember. We needed us to never forget who we are. To this day, that award from graduation sits on my bookshelf. Not because I need a trophy, but because it marked the day I finally understood being forgotten by them doesn't mean you're forgettable. It means you were meant to remember yourself. And now? I do, every single day. After that graduation day, I promised myself I would never let someone else's absence define my worth again. But promises are one thing. Healing from the disappointment of your own parents forgetting you on one of the most important days of your life? That's a process. Some days, I still wanted their approval. I caught myself wondering what it would feel like if they ever showed up to a speech or sent a proud message about an article I published. I'd even imagine them sitting in the audience one day, finally clapping for me like the families I saw that afternoon, and yet, time passed. And the applause never came, but something else did. I started getting emails. First from students who had heard me speak at that first keynote, then from school counselors who wanted me to mentor students like me. One girl wrote, "You spoke the words I couldn't say out loud." I thought I was the only one who felt invisible. I stared at that email for 20 minutes. Because suddenly, the silence I'd grown up with didn't feel like a weakness anymore. It felt like a language. One that other people were finally understanding through me, and with every message, every connection, every shared story, I was rewriting the narrative of who I thought I was meant to be. One day, I visited my childhood neighborhood to drop off supplies at a high school. As I waited for the principal in the lobby, I ran into Mrs. Vega, my middle school English teacher. She squinted at me, then gasped, "Camille Rhodes? Is that you?" I nodded, laughing. "It's me. You were always the one in the corner. With a book and a dream," she said, hugging me tight. "I knew you'd be someone." That's when I realized, some people had always noticed. I was just too busy chasing the ones who didn't. I went back to my parents' house once more, maybe 2 years after graduation. Not for anything grand. Just a weekend visit. When I was passing through, they asked the usual questions. "How's work? Are you seeing anyone? Do you still do that podcast?" I answered them all, but I didn't linger. I didn't try to make them understand the depth of what I'd done, because if they didn't recognize who I was becoming now, after everything, I wasn't going to teach them anymore. I'd already learned to stop giving them front row seats to a show they never bought tickets for. Why real audience was out there, students with tired eyes and quiet strength, women rebuilding confidence brick by brick. First against stepping into rooms no one expected them to enter. I was doing the work for them, and for the younger me. The girl who once stared at an empty row of chairs, hoping someone would show up, she deserved someone to show up for her, and now I did. Every single day. One of the most surreal moments came when my podcast was picked up by a national education network. They offered me a partnership and flew me out to a conference in New York to speak to a packed room of counselors, teachers, and school board leaders. As I stood backstage, holding the mic, I thought about that girl on graduation day, how nervous she was to walk across a stage with no one watching. This time, I stepped forward with steady feet, because now I knew something deeper. You don't need an audience to matter. You only need a voice. At the end of the panel, a woman in her 50s came up to me, tears in her eyes. "My daughter graduated last year," she said, "and I didn't show up. I thought she wouldn't notice, she was always so strong. But I did the same thing my parents did to me." She held my hand and whispered, "Thank you for helping me realize how much that moment meant." That was the first time I truly understood that my story didn't just belong to me anymore. It had become a mirror for others to see where they could be better too. I didn't need revenge, I didn't need to shame my parents or yell about the past. What I needed, what we all need, is to be reminded that being overlooked doesn't mean being unworthy. It means it's up to us to look inward, to build forward. So now, I keep going. Not for recognition, not even for healing, but to make sure no girl walks across that stage feeling unseen the way I once did, because if one voice can echo in a silent room and change a heart, then maybe mine was never supposed to blend in. A few months ago, I got a letter in the mail. The IT was from my old university. Inside was a formal invitation to receive the Alumna of Impact Award, given to one graduate each year who continues to shape lives long after their diploma. I stared at the envelope, stunned. They wanted me to come back, not just as a student but as a legacy. At the ceremony, I stood in the same stadium where I once scanned the crowd for parents who forgot me. This time, I didn't look for them. I looked at the students watching me, the girls gripping their diploma covers, the boys in wrinkled shirts, the nervous, wide-eyed, hopeful ones who just needed someone to say, "You are enough." I looked them all in the eyes and said, "You don't need anyone's permission to become who you were meant to be. And you definitely don't need someone to remember your moment to make it real. You're living it now. Own it." As I walked off the stage again, older, wiser, and this time held by applause, I knew something sacred had happened. The circle wasn't just complete. It was wide enough now for others to step into. So yes, my parents forgot my graduation, but the world? It remembered me, and more importantly, I remembered myself. After receiving the Alumna of Impact Award, I lingered in the stadium long after the seats had emptied. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the field. I stood there in silence, soaking in the stillness. Not long ago, this place had felt like a battlefield, me versus the weight of being invisible. But now, it felt like sacred ground, a place where I reclaimed my name, my voice, my power. It was in that moment I realized, healing doesn't always look like a loud epiphany. Sometimes, it's just the quiet peace of knowing you've made it through, and that you no longer need the people who never came. As I was walking to my car, a young woman in a graduation gown caught up to me. She was out of breath, eyes wide. "I didn't get a chance to ask you this earlier," she said. "But how did you not let it break you?" I paused. I knew exactly what she meant. I let it bend me, I admitted. I cried. I doubted. I wondered if I mattered. But then I remembered something no one can take from you. You're still here. You kept showing up. And that means you win. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I needed to hear that. I hugged her before we parted ways. And as I watched her disappear into the parking lot, I felt something settle in my chest. That a new chapter was beginning. Today, I run a mentorship initiative called Stageworthy, dedicated to students whose families can't or won't show up. We give them someone in the audience, someone to wave at, someone to take the photo, someone who cheers when their name is called, because everyone deserves to be witnessed at their proudest moment, and because I know, more than most, what it means to be the only one clapping for yourself in the silence. So when people ask me how I got here, I smiled. I tell them, they forgot my graduation, but I never forgot my worth. And that made all the difference.